the regular council meeting for Monday, July 9th, 2018. I'd like to call the meeting to order. The clerk tonight is Ms. Sheila Gurry. And before we get going, I want to first off recognize that we are on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nations. The second is that anyone that's wishing to ask questions during question period, the sign-up sheet will be over behind the clerks by the computers over there, and you just simply need to put your name and your item you wish to speak about. Introduction of late items, please, Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Your Worship. On the addendum this evening for agenda item 10D, we're adding delegations from Martin Giroux and Raymond DeVield regarding 20 Barsby Avenue. Agenda item 10F, development permit DP 1088 for 3425 Uplands Drive. We're adding a delegation from Randy Dorma. Agenda item 10G, development permit at 4775 Uplands Drive. We're adding a delegation from Judith Guy. Agenda item 10J, provincial support for daytime drop-in resource center. We're adding a delegation from Matthew O'Donnell. Agenda item 10K, Cannabis Task Force update. We're replacing the introduction by Mr. Dale Lindsay and replacing it with Councillor Kipp. And we're also adding a delegation from Matthew O'Donnell, as well as some correspondence dated July 5th, 2018 from Nanaimo Ladysmith Public Schools regarding Cannabis Task Force recommendations. For agenda item 12B, we're replacing zoning amendment bylaw 4500.117 with the attached version to correct the covenant registration date. For agenda item 12C, zoning amendment bylaw 2018 number 4500.121, we're replacing with the attached version to show the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure approval dated June 25th, 2018. And then we're therefore replacing the bylaw status sheet for item 12D. And that's it, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. Councillor, any other late items? Councillor Hong.
Thank you. Can I please add Kevin Shaw to 6B with regards to Victoria Crescent Association? He has a short presentation.
6B?
Yes, please.
Do you have a seconder?
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Kipp. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Any others, Council? Seeing none, motion to adopt the agenda as amended. Moved by Councillor Hong, seconded by Councillor Armstrong. Thank you. Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Next one is adoption of minutes. There are 6 sets of minutes to be adopted. You can take them as a block. Moved by Councillor Bestwick, seconded by Councillor Hong. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Next one is presentation proposed council procedure bylaw by Ms. Sheila Gurry.
Thank you, Worship. So my presentation this evening is just to give all of council and the public a heads up that a new council procedure bylaw is on its way. This presentation will just outline the reasons for a new bylaw and some of the highlight proposed changes to the new bylaw. Then I'll also go through an engagement process that we'll be doing and giving you basically an update on the next steps. So why a new council procedure bylaw? Our current bylaw, number 7060, was adopted in 2007. There's been 3 amendments since then, and they've just been minor amendments. Good governance is one of council's priorities. And consultants prepared the Watson report in 2013. So it's been 5 years now since that Watson report was conducted. Many of the recommendations that report made have been implemented, but there are a number that were involving a new procedure bylaw that haven't been done. There was staff previously that had prepared draft bylaws, but the work had not been completed. We need to address council decorum and proper parliamentary procedures that are absent in our current bylaw and would be a very useful tool going forward. So this is a good opportunity for change. The new bylaw combines recommendations from those consultants' input and research, and it will be written in a clear, concise, plain language way, and it's a useful tool for this council and future councils. So a summary of the bylaw updates will be the next several slides. This is a combination of the consultants' reports. We had 2 previous parliamentarians come in and draft some bylaws and recommend some changes. And this is a combination of that, as well as, since I've been the city clerk the last couple of years, things that would have been very useful for me had they been in our procedure bylaw, as well as recommendations that members of the public have made at the podium, and councillors that have made here at the table have provided a lot of input that has influenced the changes that you'll see coming forward. So some of the changes are, it addresses the absence of parliamentary procedures. So proper steps for reconsideration of a matter, points of order, tabling or referring a matter back to staff, and proper time to debate a bylaw at the appropriate reading of the bylaw. All of these will be laid out in the new procedure bylaw, so that if there is any question on parliamentary procedures or Robert's Rules of Order, the important ones are written right into the bylaw, which then helps provide more weight and a reference that we can turn to, and it's not just somebody's knowledge of Robert's Rules of Order, it's actually written into the procedure bylaw. Requirements for raising hand to vote. Right now, it's written in our current procedure bylaw that the way voting is handled is by a raise of hand in the affirmative. The absence of a hand raised is still a vote in the affirmative unless you raise your hand when the chair calls for those opposed. eScribe allows for voting to occur on tablets and appear on the screen, so keeping technology, how it's advancing in the future in mind, the new procedure bylaw will allow for this as we get to that point with our technology. Council decorum. It's not mentioned in our current bylaw, and the new bylaw will outline clear guidelines for acceptable conduct and debate, and this goes not only for members of council and staff, but also members of the public when they're at the podium, and it will assist in better meeting management. In-camera meeting times. So right now, our bylaw is silent on in-camera meeting times, which is why if members of the public or council have noticed, there's a meeting change for every council meeting. We have a meeting time change, pardon me. We changed the time of all of our regularly scheduled council meetings to account for the in-camera meeting times. Other than that, if we didn't have that, we would have to have a special council meeting. So if some of you remember, several months ago, I've changed it to changing the meeting time, but before that, we'd have to have 2 agendas because each in-camera meeting would have to be a special council meeting. So this would just account for, it would really assist in less staff time and resources in producing double agendas and constantly changing the notices to accommodate the start and early time. So the regular open sessions would still commence at 7 p.m. Late items and addendums. If we moved the printing and publishing of the agendas to Thursdays, which previously years ago it had been done that way, it would eliminate the need to have an addendum, which would cut down on staff resources and late items. Again, these are just potential changes, and council, I'll explain with the next steps your ability to provide further input. Public can sign up to speak on an agenda item until Monday if we were to move the printing of the agenda to Thursdays, and they'd be able to sign up till Monday, and there would be no addendums and no extra late items added besides the delegations and any items council would want to bring to at the meeting. Committee of the Wholes. These would be brought back to their originally intended format, which is a less formal meeting where issues are brought to the table, can be debated and discussed fully before coming to a council meeting to be voted on, much like you do at the Regional District of Nanaimo. And this will aid in shortening council meetings, as a fulsome discussion would already have taken place at the Committee of the Whole meeting. Speaking limits. Nothing in the current bylaw addresses speaking times for members, so putting limits in place will help move meetings along and stay on topic. Members can make a motion and vote if they wish to speak longer, and it will aid in helping meetings run more efficiently. Summary of bylaw updates continued. Consent agenda. This is one of my favorites. It's a list of various items and recommendations to address those items. Matters excluded from the list include items pertaining to the financial plan, the annual municipal report, and changes to any strategic plans. But this will give a list of all items besides those three that I've outlined there. Council may vote on and adopt in one motion all of those recommendations listed in that consent agenda, unless one of the members of council would like an item removed. You don't need a motion for that. You can just request for it to be removed from the list, and you can debate and consider it separately. Public hearings, right now, they're not addressed in our current procedure bylaw, so it will outline the process. The new bylaw will outline the process, and it's designed to assist the chair and council members by stating proper procedures to follow. Supporting policies, there is a new section which clearly defines when a supporting policy would be helpful to provide additional rules to support the new bylaw. Council would adopt these policies, and policies are easier to amend than the bylaw because they just require a resolution of council, not an amendment to the bylaw. And with the procedure bylaw, it requires publication notice of changes to the procedure bylaw. We have to provide notice in the paper in accordance with Section 94 of the Community Charter. So in conclusion, these updates that I have just, or proposed updates that I have just listed, are issues that have been brought to the attention of council, problems that are apparent to me as the corporate officer, and it clearly outlines the rule of order and parliamentary procedures, which I believe would be really beneficial and a helpful tool in a new procedure bylaw. So the next steps, which I don't have a slide for, is we have already, like I stated earlier, had 2 parliamentarians complete drafts of work done by staff, which also included a survey to mayor and council a couple of years ago. Lisa Sworn, the parliamentarian, surveyed you for your proposed ideas. Members of the public have come to meetings and provided suggestions. Mayor and council have provided feedback and suggestions to myself. In doing this job, I've come across issues that had they been spelled out clearly in the procedure bylaw, it would have been of great assistance to me in my job. So going forward, the draft bylaw will be on the committee of the whole agenda for August 27th. So the draft will be there with the current bylaw and the changes proposed. For council to provide feedback and suggestions and get a detailed explanation of the changes at that time. There will then be a public engagement session on August 28th with Lisa Sworn, parliamentarian, who will go through this procedure bylaw process and allow for public feedback. The community charter outlines the public notice that must be provided under Section 124, and Section 94 of the charter must then be followed. So Section 124 says when you plan on updating or amending your procedure bylaw, you must follow the notice requirements in Section 94, which is just basically publication in the newspaper. I plan to take it a step farther and also have that engagement session as well as a fulsome discussion with council at a committee of the whole. My plan then is to have 3 readings in front of you, hopefully by October 1st. And then adoption for October 15th. And this will allow the incoming council to not have to learn 2 procedure bylaws. They'll just have the one new one that you have helped to create and implement that will hopefully be a really good tool for that council and future councils. And that's it.
Thank you very much. I see no questions for you. On to the next item, which of course is the mayor's report. You had a question? Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Shaw.
Good evening, Kevin Shaw, the Victoria Crescent Association. The association would like to thank the City of Nanaimo and invite everyone to our Bathtub Weekend Street Festival. On Saturday, July the 21st, the roads next to the China Steps will once again be blocked off for all sorts of free, fun activities. For the kids, there will be a couple of giant slides, inflatable bouncy castle, a 60-foot obstacle course challenging your skills to see if you're a ninja warrior or a gladiator. We'll have kids' games, face painting, and animal balloons. For the adults, a car show featuring the Gabriela Cruisers, the Old English Car Club, and those Dirt Devil rods, they're called. You'll be able to stomp your feet to the Nanaimo Fiddle Society, but relax to the slow moves of Tai Chi Nanaimo. The RCMP, Nanaimo Search and Rescue, and the Nanaimo Fire Rescue will be on hand to show their vehicles. We'll have a dunk tank, and no bathtub weekend would be complete without the famous servers race. So join us Saturday, July 21st. It all begins at 9:30 in the morning for the all free. It's the Victoria Crescent Street Festival, and it's on bathtub weekend. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, sir. No questions. Thank you. So in the mayor's report, I just wanted to bring everybody's attention to the fact that it's Marine Festival month. And it started off this last weekend with Dragon Boat. There were thousands and thousands of people down at Maffeo Sutton over the course of the weekend. The weather was great. There were 59 teams that competed. The number is actually down a little bit from past years, only because there were a number of teams, including, I believe, 7 or 8 local teams that were off in Venice that are competing for the Worlds, if you can imagine that. So next weekend, on Sunday, July 15th, don't forget there's the Child Development Center's biggest fundraiser of the year, the Silly Boat Races, again at Maffeo Sutton Park. Following that, on Friday, starts the activities with respect to bathtub and bathtub weekend. There's all kinds of different activities. You can go onto the Royal Order of Nanaimo Bathtub Society website, and where they'll all be described. Don't forget, following weekend after that is the BC Day long weekend, and 2 days after the BC Day Monday is another big event in Nanaimo, which is, of course, the snowbirds come back to fly over Nanaimo. So it's a Wednesday. It's 2 days after the holiday Monday, and it proves to be, again, a great time. Make your dinner reservations early, because I know you can't get a dinner reservation on that night when the snowbirds come. Thank you. The next item, of course, is administration. And there are a number of advisory committee minutes. There are 6 of them in total. They can all come together. Someone prepared to move all of them. Moved by Councillor Thorpe. Thank you. Seconder. Seconded by Councillor Armstrong. Thank you. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Next one is under corporate services, and it will be the internal borrowing resolution to be introduced by Wendy Fuller, Manager, Business, Asset and Financial Planning. Ms. Fuller.
Thank you. As Council will recall, when we reviewed the budget this spring, the 2018-2022 financial plan included internal borrowing for 3 sanitary sewer projects in 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2022. Internal borrowing doesn't require a resolution from Council. However, it is best practice to obtain such a resolution. We are asking you to approve a resolution for the internal borrowing for 2018 for DCC SS 45, which is the Chase River Pump Station and Force Main. We will return in subsequent years to get a resolution for the internal borrowing that is planned in that year.
Thank you very much. Someone prepared to move the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Brennan, seconded by Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Next one is under public services, and that is the first item, Morningside Drive Sewer Cost Share, to be introduced by Mr. Bill Sims. Go ahead, Mr. Sims.
Thank you, Your Worship. In front of you have a report regarding the possibility of providing sewer to Morningside Drive. So a number of residents along Morningside Drive are currently on septic fields, currently failing, and they've banded together and approached the city to see if we could cost share so that they could expedite the installation of sanitary sewer along Morningside. For the city, it's an opportunity to provide a serviced washroom, instead of a porta potty at Neck Point Park, so that that helps our interest as well. So we've engaged a consultant, looked at a number of different options, and the most appropriate is a low-pressure sewer system. Similar to other areas, we find it quite effective. And it's just because of the geography of the street. So, of course, that comes with a cost. We estimate in the range of $150,000 to $240,000, as you can see on the report. And after quite a bit of discussion with the Residents Association, or Residents Group, I should say, they've indicated a willingness to contribute $12,200 for each property for a total of $61,000 towards the entire cost of the project, which I think is quite reasonable. They're going to have significant expenses on their own property as well. So in lieu of replacing a septic field, it does work out to be economic and best practice for both parties. Of course, one of the best features about this is that it really cleans up one of the pristine waterfront areas in the city. So there's 2 bylaws required. If council agrees to go forward, we would approach the residents to sign a petition for a local area service under the community charter. That would be one bylaw, and then the other bylaw would be to appropriate funds from the appropriate sewer fund for the work. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Hong.
Thank you, through you to staff. Mr. Sims, what did the residents of, I think, Green Lake, was that the last one that did the buy-in? What did they pay each to buy into the sewer, if I'm not mistaken?
My recollection is that council waived any fees. They had some costs on site, but as far as the contribution to the overall project, and I believe that was tied into an understanding that they would be serviced as part of amalgamation in the 70s.
Thank you.
Yep. Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you. Just to that Green Lake situation, somewhat different than this, but at the time, the Green Lake residents were given a certain period of time in which to take advantage of the opportunity, which I think might have been on a percentage of what the estimated cost was. And if they went outside, because some folks there had just recently replaced their septic systems, so weren't necessarily in a position at that time financially to do the sewer system hookup. But if they went outside a period of time, then they lost that benefit and advantage of the initial offering. I can't remember what the number was, but they did, there was a number if you bought in originally or if you bought in after. I just can't remember. I don't want to throw a number out there because I can't remember what it was. Thanks.
Thank you. Is someone prepared to move the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Hong, seconded by Councillor Bestwick. Thank you. Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Next one is property distribution property disposition part in Plan 174 RW of Lot 7 at Nanaimo River Road, to be introduced by Mr. Dale Lindsay. Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Your Worship. As you mentioned, we're here this evening to seek Council's approval for the disposition of the subject property. This is a piece of remnant land that was previously owned by the Greater Nanaimo Water District. We're recommending that it be disposed of and sold to Lafarge, who is the neighboring property owner. The property itself is about 0.28 hectares, and there's a value of $16,500. We have now completed the required notification, and it's required under legislation, and it's here for final consideration by council.
Thank you. Is someone prepared to move the recommendation?
I'll move both.
Moving both. Councillor Hong, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Thorpe. Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Next item is rezoning application number RA 390 at 215 Savaston Street, and to be introduced by Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is an application, as you mentioned, for rezoning. We're seeking council's recommendation on first and second reading of the associated bylaws this evening. The rezoning, if approved, would rezone the subject property from R1 to R6 in order to allow for a 5-unit multifamily project. The air photo, which is from page 81 of your agenda, is displayed on the screen.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hong.
Thank you. I see that they're putting $5,000 towards, the park improvements. Do we have any say? Is this what they're picking up? Because I keep bringing up this question that we have a housing crisis, and that pot that we need is going to grow. So $5,000 for a park improvement, or can we put $5,000 into an affordable housing pot for this area? Do we have that option?
Your worship, through to Councillor Hong, I think it's important to note that community contributions are ultimately voluntary contributions, and there's lists of potential projects that the money can be provided towards, and those lists are generated either through the official community plan or in this case through the neighborhood plan. So staff would provide them with a list of identified opportunities that are in the neighborhood plan, and it's really up to the applicants to identify where they would wish their community contributions to be resourced to. Now, in this case, they've identified the park. I would say certainly the trend with recent applications has been towards your affordable housing strategy, and that's always identified by staff as an option.
Just to follow up on that then, thank you. If you don't mind, is this the $1,000 per door that we keep talking about, or is that something different?
No, it is exactly that, Your Worship. It's the community contribution, which for multifamily is $1,000 a door, yes.
So I would really eventually like to have a look at that, where that $1,000 per door goes to affordable housing. And if they want to do community contribution to the park for variances, I'd be more inclined to have a look at that way. Because I like to, like I said, grow that pot that we need for housing. Land isn't getting any cheaper. The city doesn't have much more inventory. We're going to have to start buying some sooner or later. And we're going to have to get that money from somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Brennan.
No, I don't have anything. I'll make the motion, actually.
Okay, well, actually, I was going to, this needs, as a bylaw, it needs to go to Councilor Thorpe. Okay, thank you. Councilor Fuller.
Quick question to Mr. Lindsay. Did we revisit the $1,000 per door at this point, or are we going to revisit that? Because I recall mentioning it at some point.
Yes, Your Worship. The last time it was reviewed was through the Development Process Review Committee, which is probably going back 3 or 4 years now. There is an existing council motion on the books to review that policy, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. So I will move that zoning amendment bylaw 2018 number 4500.125 to rezone 215 Sabiston Street from single dwelling residential R1 to townhouse residential R6 pass first reading.
Seconded by Councilor Bestwick. Thank you. Discussion. Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
And I would move that zoning amendment bylaw 2018 number 4500.125 pass second reading.
Thank you. Seconded by Councilor Bestwick. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
And I would further move that council direct staff to secure the community contribution prior to the adoption of the bylaw, should council support the bylaw at third reading.
Thank you. Seconded by Councilor Bestwick. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next one, development permit number DP 1073 at 20 Barsby Avenue. Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Your Worship. Maybe I could ask that page 92 in the agenda, or sorry, the air photo, that's 92. Thank you very much. I wanted to start off here because this is certainly a challenging site from many perspectives. It's a previously disturbed site, first of all. There's been activity on this property for many years, but it's also challenging in that it's bound on almost all sides by watercourse setbacks. So you have before you this evening a development permit. This property may look familiar to council because there has been a previous development permit on this property for 58 units. This application is a revision to that previous application, is now seeking a development permit which will allow for 90 units on the subject property. There are variances to building height, yard setbacks, watercourse setbacks, and parking.
Thank you very much. We have a delegation, Mr. Martin Juro and Raymond DeBeeld. Thank you, gentlemen. You have 10 minutes.
Raymond DeBeeld, architect for the project, and Martin Juro, project manager for Platinum Properties. We're really just here if you guys have any questions in regards to us.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bestwick has questions.
Thank you,
Councillor
fellas. Sorry, thank you. You're asking for 6 amendments, and of course, the riparian setback, the reduced watercourse setback at the top of the bank from 30 meters to 0. Help me understand what the trade-off is. Help me understand what the trade-off in terms of the community benefit in the trailway that exists and how you will enhance, assumedly, that parkway-connected trail from, I'll say Bowen Park, to Swayalana.
Sure. I will grab the slides if I can, so I can just press.
And I ask that question just because in recognition of the 0 setback at the top of the watercourse, if you will, making an assumption that there will be a boardwalk or some enhanced walkway behind there,
I can first
or
start
in
with
front.
the first slide is that we're enhancing along the Barsby area there in terms of the laneway, the connection between along the Millstone. And if I can catch this, how do I point this? Oh, left and right, top and down, sorry.
Can you pull the microphone up so that people can hear you? Thank you.
I'll use this other slide here. This one here shows the riparian setback, and also in red is the fisheries SPIA setback. The footprint of the building is actually the same as the identical, like 98% the same as the original building. The original building, Parkade, was following just on the offside of that light blue line of where we've kind of straightened it out. So in exchange for that, with the extra story to pay for the Parkade, we're also upgrading all the riparian area between around the Millstone right-of-way and our property, as well as providing natural vegetation to the podium area. So there's an increased habitat area. Like I say, the building was essentially the same as before, so yeah, I don't know.
Summarizes. The only thing that changed in comparison with the previous development permit is the parking, which goes into the setback to small areas. That's the only difference.
Okay.
So the benefit is you don't have any surface parking, right?
Yeah, so pre this, we don't really get involved in what your design looks like and all that stuff. So my question is, will folks be walking in the front of the building and connect back on, or will they be walking behind the building on the Millstone side?
It's still, we haven't changed where the pathway is that goes around the park to the north.
Okay, so, but you will be enhancing
We'll be enhancing
the
vegetation,
pedestrian
get rid of all
parkway, or sorry, pedestrian walkway for its connectivity.
Yes, part of that was done by the property being given back where the pathway was on this property originally by the previous owner. So that's
Okay.
already been dedicated on the previous CP.
Okay, maybe, I'm not sure, maybe Mr. Lindsay can help me if he understands it a little bit where I'm going.
Sorry, Your Worship, if the question is, normally we look for compensation anytime we go into a riparian setback. So if your question is, where is that compensation? It's a combination of improvements on the site and in the park in terms of the removal of invasive species, the replanting of those areas. So from our perspective, the improvements that are being done both on the land and in the adjacent park allow for basically net zero in terms of the overall impact, and it's what we look for anytime we're looking for watercourse setbacks.
And we're also improving the streetscape along the lane on Barsby as well, essentially repaving.
Well, you'd have to do that with your development, would you not?
No, but I think it's a big benefit because it's a major bikeway through it and a walkway through there.
And that's why I'm asking the question, because of the major cycling and pedestrian traffic that goes through there.
But that's primarily Barsby.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, between the bridge.
Thank you. Councillor Hong.
Thank you. Through to the delegation or maybe staff. When you had 58 units, how many parking stalls were you providing?
There was a previous DP which we were not, it might show. I can't tell you because that was many years ago.
Okay,
It had a lot of the variances that we have with this project in terms of, the only difference is we have more parking, or I think our variance is actually better than theirs. We have the same front yard setback to Barsby as they did, the same front yard setback for the parkade as they did. Building footprint is essentially the same as the original project. The only thing that we're doing that's different is the extra story in terms of height. They had a variance for height as well, about half as much as we do. And the parkade essentially allows us and the parking underneath to essentially pay for a lot of the upgrades to the park. And also we're providing a lot more native vegetation on top of the podium, which is the parkade, which the other scheme wasn't doing.
okay, thank you, because I just wanted to follow up on that with this variance from, I guess.
So I should also say, sorry to interrupt, but we also have 1 and 2 tiers with this project. So we're providing electric vehicle charging, car share, a lot more bike storage, that kind of stuff. We're also providing as part of the tiers a vehicle as well. So that's all part of the parking variance.
Thank you, yeah, so just to follow up on that, we approved a seniors facility, this exactly from staff report right here, 57 rental apartment building on 20 Prideaux Street with a huge variance. That area is going to be busy. I didn't know that this was going to be a 90-unit condo development. I thought it was actually a lot smaller in scale. So my question, I think, is going to be what the residents in that area are going to be concerned about is parking. On-street parking is going to be very limited, and since these are going to be condos, you're going to have guests coming. 90 units, and I assume you're going to have guests. You're going to have no parking for them. Very limited street parking, if anything. So I have concerns about the parking. I would be okay with at least 1 stall per condo. You know, you haven't even, I don't know what the condo units are, if they're going to be, you know, micros, because I would love to see some micro suites and all the other stuff, but it doesn't tell me that from your variance of 58 to 90. And for that reason, I have concerns about it because it's not helping with our affordability with the designs that we need, and especially with parking for a condo unit. Rental, I can look at, but when it comes to a condo, it's going to be a tough decision, so I'm going to have to listen to what some of my other colleagues have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
Just for clarification, I think they're only asking for 5. They went from 90 to 85.
Yeah, that was the previous scheme, sorry.
You're asking for 85 parking, a variance to 85 from 90, correct? Thank you.
Thank you. We have no more questions for you. Thank you very much. Is someone prepared to move the recommendation? Second. Moved by Councillor Armstrong, seconded by Councillor Beswick. Any further discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Next one, development permit number DP 1075 at 3598 Norwell Drive, to be introduced by Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Your Worship. Again, this property may be familiar to council as it was rezoned just last fall to allow for this project, to allow for a row housing development. So this evening, you're considering a development permit. As noted at the time of rezoning, but given the nature of the property, it does require a lot depth variance from 27 meters to 19.46 meters. In addition to the variance that was previously identified, the applicant's also requesting relatively minor height variances for these buildings.
Thank you very much. Is someone prepared to move the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Beswick, seconded by Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Next one, development permit number DP 1088 at 3425 Uplands Drive, to be introduced by Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Worship. Again, this is an application that went through the rezoning process. In this case, it was actually approved in the fall of 2016. Council, I think you're aware that this application is from the Nanaimo Association of Community Living. And I note that partly because of the size of the parking stall variances, and Council may have questions about that. This was identified at the time of rezoning. The overall development is for 28 units, with 12 of those units being identified for NACL clients. And given the nature of their clients, parking is, we believe, not required for those units. The remaining 16 units are identified for affordable rentals. So the applicants are providing one stall for each of the rental plus one additional stall. But that's ultimately the variance from 46 to 17. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have two delegations. The first one is Mr. Graham Morey, Executive Director in the Nanaimo Association for Community Living, and Mr. John Jessup, Project Manager in the Nanaimo Association for Community Living. Gentlemen. You have up to 10 minutes.
We are going to waive our right for a presentation, but we wanted to be here in case there were any questions or concerns that we might be able to respond to that weren't in the council report.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Armstrong?
Yeah, just have a question on the parking. I know that you said that there'd be one extra or whatever it was. Is there disabled parking, more than just one spot for that particular project?
I believe there's one disabled parking out of the total 17.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see no further questions. No further questions. Thank you. Thank you. No, we have a delegation, another delegation. Mr. Randy Dorman.
The presenters pushing page 126.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. You have 10 minutes.
Hi, I'm the neighbor next door at 3405, and I have a lot of issues with the idea of the parking. I have some pictures that I brought with me that I want to make sure got handed out. Is this part of my 10 minutes? Fortunately, I only got noticed about this on Wednesday, so it didn't give me a lot of time to give you guys some proper photos on the screen. The first agenda would be about the parking. They have one manager parking. When they're running their programs during the day. I live right next door. There's always 2 more cars there every morning to help the people get going in the morning. If you read through, I don't know if any of you have read through this, but it does talk about their programs that they run through the one building. There will be also, with such a large development there will be definitely be a maintenance person and also a groundskeeper to keep this property up, which would, they need at least 3 more stalls than just the one for the manager. The 15 renters, we all know single people do have more than one friend for 15 people. Because that's what they've asked, is for one visitor parking stall, right? And so I think there should be at least another 5 for those people to have friends over and to maybe have people stay the night. And for most of the NCL clients, it's their first time from ever moving away from home. So parents and other family members will all be visiting. There should be at least another 5 for those people that are coming to visit as well, for a total of 10 extra on top. The one wheelchair, sure, that's bare minimum. I think really they need 12 with their people, and their people, the guest parking, they need at least 12 more minimum parking stalls. Pictures I have taken here of the area where the parking is going to be now. So you see on the picture there, the lower parking below the sewage on the picture up there. That is where I've taken the first picture of, and it is 90 feet below the sewer line. And at this time, they're only using about 40 to 45 feet of that picture I've taken there of open area. So it's not really going to be cutting down any more trees. So there's lots more room there for a building or parking. The second picture is there if they're parking on the street, looking left and right. Those two cars on both the pictures are over 25 feet away from my exiting my driveway, looking both directions. So parking on the street would totally cause danger to me and my people around me that live in my on my little road that I have in there. The city made me, if you see the one picture, they made me block off my other exit there. So there's a fence looking down there too that you can see in the picture just barely. They made me block off my other driveway. The east-facing, I'm going to move on now to the east-facing decks and building. They wanted to move closer and onto my property, closer to my property line. They failed to mention the fact that this would ruin my privacy to my two homes on the east property. The first picture is looking up at my driveway towards Uplands. Neighbors sit on that deck and tan and barbecue, enjoy quiet times. My kids play hockey and basketball on the concrete pad that you see before the dog. The second picture is how close they will be standing, watching my kids play and watching my neighbors tan. The front windows that you see upstairs are my children's bedrooms that they are going to be looking at from those balconies 10 feet off my property line. And the fifth picture is what I'll be looking at when I go to work every morning at 4:30. The city should have a bylaw in place for apartments that when and if the neighboring properties are single-family dwellings, and if the builder would like to put apartments sideways on the property, there must be a backyard variance of 7 meters for us single-family dwellings. So this does not happen now or in the future or up the road at Collins Place, where is now for sale. How are we going to tell those people they can't? You guys are making a decision here today for that piece of property as well, because this is going to make the difference to Colin as well. He has a brand new $1 million home up the road. The one next door is for sale. They want to see about getting R6 zoning there too. Are we going to be allowed to put the apartment sideways and 10 feet from his property line looking in at his family and his kids? Sorry. Now, as you all saw in the first picture, there is enough room for the building without cutting down more trees. That third building, building B, should be down below, which would give them more suitable parking up top where most of the apartments are. There's 25 apartments up top. They have 6 parking stalls for those 25 apartments up top. When it's snowing and raining, who's really going to want to go use those 10 down below? They don't even have a path for them to walk up. They got to walk up the hill. That's horrible parking, especially considering the nature of the people, right? There's no reason. Okay. When I bought this property, it was to give my children and my my family a safe place to play and have fun outside without fear. If these decks, even placed 3 meters from our property line, will be too close, needles, razors, cigarettes, and other things can be all thrown into our yard with ease. I did discuss this with Graham before about the third home that backed onto my property. I would give them sewage right away through the bottom end of my property so they could put the third home down, and it was also access the other properties beyond their property for sewage below the line that is there now, because the line where the sewage is now is less than half. Those are 540 feet deep, and I think where he's at there is maybe 200 where the sewage is, so there's a lot of wasted land there. He was talking about also on there about how, not him himself, but this thing here at the wetlands. It's not wet back there. It's gravel all the way to the last maybe 30 feet of before the creek. And that's how much the zoning bylaw asks for, is 15 meters, so it's plenty. Anyways, I have no more to say unless you have, okay, one last thing. I'm sorry. Where is it? This decision you make to hopefully disallow it will make a much better place to protect single-family dwellings and the right to our privacy and the way we have it now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I see no questions. Thank you. Is someone prepared to move the recommendation to get it on the floor? Moved by Councillor Brennan.
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Armstrong. Thank you. Discussion. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. I cannot support the parking variance. I'm very concerned about the lack of parking. Many of the individuals there will have home care support. Where are they going to park? I agree with what the presenter said, that there's visitors, there's whatever, and I don't believe one spot is enough. So for those reasons, I cannot support the parking variance. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bessary.
Thank you. I won't be supporting the variance for the additional height, and the parking is an issue, of course, and I do think that this will set a precedent for the neighboring properties that will just simply magnify and proliferate the problem of parking and density, which density is a double-edged sword. It's kind of good, but not always, and not in every location, and not in every place. And over the years, I've oftentimes challenged how dense is dense. And I have a real serious concern, not with the proponents and what their intentions are, but rather the location and the impact that it will have on neighboring properties in the future. So I won't be supporting it. Thank you.
Councillor Hong.
Thank you. Actually, unlike the last one, I will support this variance. For that reason is because this is a good project. This is going to add to affordable housing. It's not a lot, but it is 15 affordable rental housing units, as we know that rental units, not everybody has a car. So I'm not as concerned. NACL has a great reputation for care for their clients. And having an on-site manager is really good for development this size. If the residents have concerns and issues, they can easily address this. You're not calling a 1-800 number from somebody else that's away. So for that reason, I will support those variances, and I think this is a good project, and this is going to afford, give a nice home for the people at the NACL. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. Similar to Councillor Hong, I have supported this project when it's come before us. I think NACL is a very worthwhile organization. I certainly had a close look at the parking variance, and it was a concern to me, but I was satisfied when I read the report of the rationale for the reduction, and I'm not totally comfortable with it, but I think I can support it based on what I have read. The other variances, although I sympathize with the delegation, the other variances are relatively minor and I don't think would greatly affect the overall result of the building. And I recognize that he has concerns about the project and its design overall, but I think we're basically past that point now. So the bottom line for me is I can live with the parking variance and I will support the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Brennan.
I don't have anything to add to what Councillor Hong and Councillor Thorpe have said. I support this application. I support the NACL. I am very happy that their clients will have this kind of housing. It's housing that we've needed for some time, and I look forward to seeing it happen. I think, you know, we live in a city. Sometimes we can see our neighbors play. We can see the kids on the street playing hockey and whatever. And from my point of view, that's a good thing, that we can watch each other's children play. So I'm really satisfied with this.
Thank you. So, Council, if you're ready to ask the question, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Show Councillors Armstrong, Councillor Bestwick opposed. Motion carries. Next item, development permit number 1093 at 4775 Uplands Drive. To be introduced by Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is development permit, as you mentioned, on the subject property. This is for 2 4-story buildings, and it's the next phase of the successful Longwood project. There is a height variance that's being requested, and I would note that's to allow for gable roofs, which is consistent with the overall design that you see in that community.
Thank you very much. We have one delegation, and that is Judith Guy. And I hope I pronounced it properly.
Actually, it's Guy, but thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, the council members who are here. We are here, Mr. Jackson and myself, representing, or not representing any of the people other than ourselves. We are here as residents of the strata, VIS 499, with concerns about this new development of 2 apartment buildings with 86 units slated to eventually become part of our strata. And if you're looking at the map, and the map on the page there, it will be in the lower right area of 4775 that this building is going in. The part outlined by red. There is only one street that goes into this development, and it's a laneway. It doesn't have shoulders. It basically allows 2 cars to pass. With this new development, there will be 7 driveways opening onto a lane that is about 175 meters long, about a city block. Currently, there are 3 entrances with 117 units using underground parking ramps that have limited visibility. So as we come out of some of those buildings, it isn't a clear visibility to see who's moving along Edgewater Lane. 3 other buildings further on down use this driveway, and they are 164 units. And they use this driveway to access Uplands because the visibility is somewhat better than it is in front of another building. This new development will add 86 units, but an increase of 4 driveways, 2 for off-road parking and 2 for underground parking. And one of them has a very sharp U-shaped turn to get into the underground parking, making visibility different. Are very difficult. That's building B. In 175 meters, which is about 1 city block, there will be 7 parking driveways with the potential use overall by 367 units, some residents having more than 2 cars. So in this area right now, we have residents who walk Some of them have mobility limitations, and others use the roadway to walk, to go grocery shopping, and to walk their dogs. So if you factor into that picture a big garbage truck parked at the top of one of those ramps going to the underground parking to pick up the garbage, and then this increase in the number of cars that would be using that narrow roadway, it really does affect how people walk and move around in our complex. The General Development Permit Area Design Guide states that off-street parking should be provided in a number of small parking areas separated by areas of landscaping. And safety includes, for example, designs that successfully integrate pedestrian and vehicle circulation, or project designs that promote social interaction and a sense of mutual responsibility for one another's safety. We see this as quite a serious safety issue. Many of the residents, it's not limited to people who are elderly, but many of the residents are older. And we hope that this plan could be revised with some of the parking access be reduced so that driveways will not come into such a condensed area. I see it as quite a serious issue. And then we're also concerned about the unnecessary removal of mature trees. There are, at estimate, 50 trees on this property that are between 60 and 70 feet tall. And all of our buildings in this area have surrounding clumps of trees that really give a sense of privacy for each building and a sense of, I guess it's a sense of structure of a very nice garden landscape. And the indication from what we can see on the plans is that 5 single-spaced 5-meter Douglas fir trees will be added after all this timber is taken down. There will be a lot of small landscape shrubbery, but basically in terms of the very large trees, they are slated to be removed. Also, under the General Development Permit Area Design Guidelines, the development must relate to the natural environment, and it's a fundamental aspect of quality of life in Nanaimo. Building and site design should therefore complement and relate to the character of this site. And certainly for the other buildings on the Longwood development, those trees have been preserved and protected in clumps, certainly not intense through the whole area, but there are enough trees to be significant, and that will change with this development. So we are asking that these two things be considered. The safety issue is really key. We don't want people injured, and we want people to be able to move around with a sense of safety and comfort. And the other one is that once those trees come down, they won't be back. Trees 60 and 70 feet tall take a long time to grow. So we're asking that consideration be given in the planning of the siting of those two buildings.
Thank you. Thank you. Before you go away, we have a question from Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. I appreciate your concerns. However, what we're being asked to is to look at the maximum building height increase from 14 meters to 16 meters. Did you have any, I never heard you address those. Is there any concerns around that?
That's not why we're here.
Okay.
And we didn't say that was why we were
No, that's
coming.
what
Yeah,
we're being asked to vote on, though.
Okay, so then who do we speak to about this? Because we have phoned City Hall on 3 or 4 occasions asking who to speak to.
No, you're at the right place.
Are we?
Yes,
Good.
we're approving a development permit tonight with 1 variance.
Okay.
Thank you very much. No other questions for you. Oh, Councillor Brennan, do you have a question for the delegation?
Sorry, no, it isn't number one, I apologize for not getting back to you.
Okay, thank you.
But
Thank
I do
you.
want to ask staff some questions.
Go ahead.
So, when we have a question like this, where the request in front of us is for this variance, but we have concern, I don't necessarily have concerns about the height, but I do have concerns about the buffering between the two projects. So while we have that question before us in terms of height, if I want to address this, or if the neighbors want to address this, where do they go, or can they go anywhere? Do our bylaws provide for opportunities to ask for more buffering? Because when I drove through Longwood, it was carefully constructed for that reason, right? And now it comes to the neighbor and it's not, it doesn't appear to be as important, and I wonder how or if we can address that.
Generally, Your Worship, with development permits, they're brought before council because we feel they comply with the form and character guidelines that the city has. So unless there is a specific variance that council has concern with, it's somewhat difficult to turn down a development permit unless you believe staff are wrong and there's something fundamentally about this design that does not comply with the city's design guidelines, not the guidelines of the development or the strata, but the city's design guidelines. And in this case, staff are of the perspective that they do comply. There's an image, maybe I could just ask page 150 to be brought up. This is the overall landscape plan. But what I wanted to comment on is there is, as the delegation mentioned, a number of access points into that internal roadway. Again, that's a private roadway, Edgewater. It's not a city road. That was part of the original comprehensive plan from 1995, I think it was. So the number of accesses along that road, although we review it, it's ultimately not controlled by city bylaw. So there's no real concern from an access point. Where we're concerned is where Edgewater hits uplands, and that's where staff would be looking at. But staff have no concerns. Again, it's in keeping with, in our minds, with the original intent of the property. In terms of the overall design, the height variance is partially a response to that design, those design cues that are in the surrounding buildings. And also is the significant amounts of underground parking. So there is some surface parking here, but the vast majority of the parking will be under building, as it is with the original phases of the Longwood development.
Do we have any input into, like, I would think that the design advisory panel has input into saying, we'd like it if you could keep more trees here or there, or whatever.
Yeah.
Whose responsibility it
Yeah,
is?
absolutely. That's something that staff look at, first of all, in all cases, but also the design panel. And in the report, there's a number of recommendations that came forward from the design panel that then the applicants go back and their architect try to incorporate into the project. So any opportunity to preserve existing tree canopy is always something that we will look for. To be honest, it becomes difficult, especially with you're talking large-scale fir trees, it becomes difficult to develop a site and retain sufficient enough buffers around those trees to allow for their protection. So as I think was mentioned by the delegation, although there may be opportunities for limited tree protection, there is a substantial tree replanting, with some of those being large-scale, or ultimately will be large-scale trees.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Hong.
Thank you. Through you to staff, was this phase and this size, it said that it conformed to what staff recommendations were, so they're not asking for more units than what they originally had asked for, is that correct?
I'm not sure what you mean by, sorry, Councillor Hong, I'm not sure what you mean by originally had asked for. If you mean what had been originally identified in the master plan?
Yes.
Sorry, I don't recall if there was an exact number of units. What I would say is the building form and massing is as per the original master plan.
Okay, because I'm just reading on here, the subject property has 2 covenants registered on title that restricts the scale of the development, unit size, and total number of units, and provide additional design guidelines. The proposed development meets all of the covenant requirements.
Sorry, I better understand your question. Yes, in that case, the covenants that were registered at the time of the original master plan, again, this project complies with the intent of that master plan and those specific covenants, yes.
Great, so the residents at that time knew that this was going to be developed. This isn't something that we're throwing on those people that are living in these complexes, saying that you're taking away our park space. They knew that this was coming, or it was proposed to come.
Yeah, and I didn't hear that, to be fair, from the speakers, I didn't hear them say that. I think everybody that lives there understands that this was the next phase in that overall project.
Thank you.
Councillor Fuller.
Just a quick question. If this development did not have the recommendation for the variance, would it even be coming before us?
Your worship, through Councillor Fuller, given the size of the project, they still would have likely need to come to council. Under your delegation bylaw, I know what you're getting at, under your delegation bylaw, if there's no variances or only minor variances, those can be deferred to staff to approve those form and character development permits. But I think this project, just on the number of units, if it's not on, it's very close to that bar when it would need to ultimately come to council with or without variances.
Yeah, I was just curious as to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. To me, this seems somewhat similar to the previous development permit that we were talking about a few minutes ago. Again, I have sympathy for the delegation, but I repeat, as Councillor Armstrong said, what we're here to do is approve the increase in building height, the variation of 2 meters, which to me does not greatly change the overall development and the look of it. And it seems to me that, although I don't know that all of the residents that are existing in the buildings nearby knew of this pending development, but the fact remains that this fits zoning. The project is within the guidelines that the city had set out, and I'm sure they would prefer that there was a bigger buffer or that there was fewer intrusions onto their privacy, but this does fit with current zoning, and it is allowable. And so if I am only looking at the variance for height, I'll be supporting that and therefore supporting this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brennan.
Yeah, I don't feel that there is any alternative to supporting this, and so I will. But I would urge the developer to meet with the neighbors in a meaningful way and see if the issue of the buffering can be better addressed, at least close to their satisfaction.
Thank you very much. Is someone prepared to move the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Hong. Seconded by Councillor Armstrong. Thank you. Any further discussion? Councillor Hong?
Thank you. Yes, this did come before the Design Advisory Panel. As you can see on the recommendations, they did make a lot, and the developer actually has acknowledged all those changes and improved on the recommendations. So therefore I support it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If you're ready to call the question, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Next one, BC Energy Step Code Implementation Strategy, to be introduced by Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to immediately turn it over to Rob Lawrence, who is our environmental planner, who has a brief presentation to walk you through the report this evening.
Thank you.
Your Worship, the intention is to really seek your endorsement to implement a strategy to implement the BC Energy Step Code, and I'm going to go through a few slides just to give you a bit of background. So the code itself is a provincial legislation that was adopted in April 2017 and came into force in December. It builds on the BC Building Code by providing a voluntary compliance path to focusing on energy efficiency. It's looking at performance-based targets as opposed to prescriptive, which allows flexibility by the builder in how they meet the steps, and works toward an ultimate compliance that the province is looking at for 2032. When you look at the step code diagram here, it's for Part 9 buildings, the steps run from 1 to 5. Step 1 being code compliance, so basically existing code with doing an energy assessment or energy modeling depending on the scale of the building, and then progressively going up to scales similar to, for step 2 being EnerGuide 80 and all the way up to net zero ready, which is going to be a requirement by the province by that time in 2032. So it provides an opportunity through a stepped process and with a long time frame for local governments to work with the local building community and other stakeholders to come up with a series of either incentives or regulatory measures to eventually work toward meeting the target in 2032. As for Part 9 buildings, there's a similar code for Part 3 high-performance and more complex buildings that go up to Step 4. And Nanaimo is within the area where Part 3 buildings can also participate in the program. So a key component, I think, at this stage for us is education and awareness and encouraging the use of home energy assessors and energy modeling. So one thing we do want to see as an important step in this is developing an energy rebate program, basically following a similar structure to what the regional district has been following for a few years, where home energy assessments can receive a rebate for doing an assessment for their home. The only difference in Nanaimo is that we would look at doing new constructions as well as new existing homes for the first year to allow for education and awareness about the Energy Step Code and the requirements to meet those steps as a way of encouraging education and training by the building community. So for an initial rebate for $150, a home energy assessment could be done. We would encourage that to be at the mid-construction stage, so there's an opportunity to look for opportunities to improve efficiency for a new home, but for an existing home, it would be likely, again, at one point in time, and a follow-up rebate would be allowed with additional funds up to $200, depending on how much more efficient the home is for an existing home, and whether or not for a new construction, any kind of issues that needed to be improved upon were completed by the end of construction. Other components of the strategy really look at the training opportunities and the good connections we have with the building community, but also with the regional district and other communities up and down the island. So there have been efforts and initiatives already underway that the city's been participating in, and we would continue to do that and build those liaisons and develop training opportunities that fit what the needs are for the building community here. We would also look at some incentive opportunities, beginning with looking at some amendments to our Schedule D in the zoning bylaw, where we would allow additional amenity points for builders that meet or exceed Step 3. And also, as a kind of a fundamental step, looking at the building bylaw and requiring that Step 1 become a requirement for all construction in a one-year effective date from when the bylaw is introduced to council. So again, Step 1 is simply going through and doing an energy assessment to confirm what's already required in the building code. So it's not going any further than what's already done currently, but it provides that opportunity for education, awareness, and for the builder and the homeowner to understand what the actual energy efficiency of the home they're getting is at the end of the day. The other point would be looking at further down the road in 2019, looking at a rezoning policy to require multifamily mixed-use buildings to enter into a covenant where they would require Step 2 compliance. Throughout all these steps, we would continue to monitor and work with the building community to see how the response is as we've kind of moved through these steps going forward between now and 2020, and we would make adjustments as we go forward. Those are my slides, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Hong.
Thank you. Through you, thank you, staff, for that presentation. I think it's great that if we can build more energy efficient housing. Obviously, we know BC Hydro and everything isn't going down, so that's good. But I just have a question with regards to a cost. For example, a standard house built a building code will say is $500,000 to build it. What, from Step 2, I guess, to 3 to 4 to 5, what are the costs? So like, how do we justify that to residents that are interested in buying a step 4 house?
I guess to underscore things, at this point, we're not going to be requiring higher steps. This is going to be a voluntary kind of measure. So there are incentives for developers who are willing, for example, for additional density, to go to those higher steps. And I would argue by getting that additional density, that's covering the cost that they would have to meet to try and get to those higher steps. So at the end of the day, you get a better product, and the resident gets a better, more energy efficient home, and we still meet those needs in ways like that, as opposed to just making it a regulatory requirement at this point.
Great, thank you. And just to follow up on that with regards to the $150 and to the $200 rebate, is that enough initiative for a builder of a new house to apply for that?
It's per house. It's an incentive. There are other rebates out there that a developer or an existing homeowner could take advantage of, depending on what their needs are. An energy home assessment can run anywhere from $300 to $500, depending on the scale of the home. So it does provide a significant incentive, and there, as they say, through Terracin, through BC Hydro, there are other rebates out there that they can double up on if they wish. And we would provide that information on our website as part of the rebate webpage.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to make a comment, and that is the tool of incentivizing with the density bonusing. We know that that tool is already being used by many communities to help with non-market housing in current developments. So I can see some challenges. And I said that at the event that the training session that we attended at the RDN, that I'm concerned that when you're offering density bonusing for non-market affordable housing embedded in a project, then you're offering more density bonusing, or the tool's already been used for this type of thing, for the step code. There could be some conflicts. If I recall, the unit at the unit on Bowen Road, the Nanaimo Aboriginal Center.
Oh, yes.
They were around 10% premium, but they were working, and at least to explain, I understand they were working, it was the first time.
It was a passive house.
They had a passive house.
Approach, yeah.
And they discovered that they collided head on with the new seismic code. However, in the building of that, they actually they learned a lot of things, that they could actually reduce some of the exterior walls because of the pillars that they were creating. And in fact, they said they could probably, if they had to do that project again, the premium would be significantly less. At least that's what they advised me. Thank you. So I have no further questions for you, Mr. Lawrence.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item is back to the supervised consumption service.
We have to have a motion.
Oh, I'm sorry, pardon me. That council endorse the implementation strategy of the Energy Step Code as outlined with the report titled BC Energy Step Code Implementation Strategy. Councillor Hong.
Second.
And it's seconded by Councillor Kipp. Thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Now, supervised consumption service. Proposed zoning bylaw amendments to be introduced by Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Your Worship. As you mentioned, this report's regarding supervised consumption services, but maybe just to back up a little bit in some history. It's been over 10 years since the city looked at zoning for what I would call its social service uses. At that time, when the last sort of comprehensive review was done, there was 3 main categories identified for social service uses, basically office, people providing advocacy and counseling, and then the 3rd tier being for drug and alcohol treatment. The drug treatment portion was left at that time as a site-specific rezoning. So today, if you want to have a supervised consumption service in the community, it requires site-specific rezoning. And if you recall, a number of months ago, Dr. Hasselbeck from Island Health was in front of you, and one of his recommendations was that we may be time to step back and look at how the community deals with zoning, specifically in response to the overdose crisis that we're currently experiencing. So this report before you this evening is just the first step in that staff are recommending that it is time to review our regulations around social service zoning, and by way of kicking off this process, recommending that you refer it to the Planning and Development Committee and the Public Safety Committee for their review and input.
Thank you. Is anyone prepared to move the recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Hong, and seconded by Councillor Armstrong. Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Next one is for the provincial support of daytime drop-in resource center to be introduced by Mr. Lindsay.
Again, thank you, Your Worship. Council, you'll recall that in your 2018 budget, you specifically added $100,000 for daytime drop-in. At that time, staff did note that the only way to bring forward a project would be to use that money in conjunction with other partners, that we'd either need to find other partners to bring forward a daytime drop-in facility. So this is what we believe is the best approach after talking to those partners, is the recommendation for a letter to be sent from the Mayor's office through our MLA, Leonard Krogh, requesting that it be brought forward to an interministerial forum for consideration. So the draft letter is attached to the report, and we're seeking Council's endorsement this evening.
Thank you very much. We do have one delegation, Mr. Matthew O'Donnell. Thank you, sir. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you. I'll be brief. Hi, my name is Matthew O'Donnell. I live on Old Victoria Road in Nanaimo. I'm here just to talk about the drop-in center and kind of how it's gone, how it was originally discussed back in March, and how it's kind of evolved now to a $650,000 project, where the city is now going to be asking the provincial government for $550,000 of that $650,000 per year to make this drop-in center happen. And of the $650,000, $400,000 of that is earmarked every year just for 4 staff members, apparently 3 outreach workers and 1 maintenance personnel, whatever that means. So as a private citizen, I would like to say that if you're going to direct Mayor McKay to ask the provincial government for over $500,000, then why not ask for something that will directly help ease the pressure of the homeless crisis, something that a $650,000 a year center will not provide. Most homeless people I have spoken to about the drop-in center, and this was when the number floated around was only $100,000, most are in opposition of the drop-in center due to the high cost and the fact that these drop-in centers have existed before, and preferred to see that money to go into actual housing or initiatives that would provide immediate housing. Now that it's at over $650,000 per year, that's a huge number, and if we were going to ask for that large amount from the province, could we not earmark those funds somewhere where it would have a more immediate effect on the clear homeless crisis that we're experiencing right here in Nanaimo, right in this downtown? I would suggest, with all due respect, that our municipal government is slightly out of touch with the true reality on the ground here in Nanaimo pertaining to the homeless crisis. And please understand that I use the word crisis in the truest of words. It's not just a tagline for me, it's a real crisis. If we're going to ask the province for over $500,000, then let's ask for something that will actually fight back against this crisis, instead of asking for an extremely expensive $650,000 Band-Aid that will do absolutely nothing to mitigate this crisis and will maintain the status quo. And if we would like to look at the status quo, all we have to really look at is One Port Drive or the tents that are here at the conference center right now outside, just people staying out of the rain and whatnot. We're in crisis mode, so I really don't think that a $650,000 drop-in center is the answer. I think that we need more immediate solutions. So that's realistically all I have to say about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hong.
Thank you, Mr. O'Donnell. Just a question. When staff brought this to us to debate, why didn't you come and tell us that you didn't need the $100,000? Why did we waste so much time doing this if now you're telling us that it's not going to make a difference?
with all due respect, I really hope you're not putting this back on me as a private citizen. The fact of the matter is, in March, you know, that was part of the city offered that they were going to put $100,000 towards the drop-in center. I'm in support of a place for homeless people to go during the day where they can get out of the rain, where they don't have to linger around on our sidewalks in the doorways of your businesses. I'm in favor of that. What I'm not in favor of is a $650,000 project where $400,000 of it is earmarked towards staffing. So I'm in favor of a project that puts homeless people somewhere. I'm not in favor of an overfunded $650,000 a year monstrosity. Like
Well,
what you
how
have
much
here.
did you really think it was going to cost?
I don't know, how much does it cost to rent a building in downtown Nanaimo for commercial reasons, $1,000 a month?
Good luck. But the problem is staff. You know, we as a city pay people well. Unless it's nonprofits are going to step up to do this. And from what I can see, we didn't have anybody step up to do this. So if we have to do this and we want to do it properly with the proper help, properly trained people, nobody is going to go to school to become a nurse aide and all these other things and do this for free. That wasn't our expectation. Our expectation was to put $100,000 as a placeholder to get other people to buy into it so we can actually make a center that was actually making a difference, not renting a space and saying, hey, you can come in here because we have a space with somebody that's just volunteering. That wasn't the goal. The goal was to actually make a space, have services, have experienced staff help these people. And that was the goal. So I don't understand what you thought we were going to do, because you know the goal when I read this from our council was this was a placeholder. We were going to try to get other funding and other organizations to step up. This just isn't a City of Nanaimo council issue. This is a provincial issue. This is a federal issue. If we can get money from these other levels of government, why not? Let's try it. So I will fully support this and our staff's effort to get to this point. Thank you.
Absolutely. I would just like to rebut really quickly about, once again, with the cost. I personally firsthand know several, like many actually, outreach workers, professionals who are more than qualified to provide outreach to the homeless, who they're more than happy to just volunteer their time to do it because it's important to them and because they care about their city. So don't tell me for 1 second, nobody can tell me that for four salaried positions, it's going to be $400,000. That's BS. You know it, I know it.
You haven't seen the staff wages and what nurses and doctors and everybody else makes. That's the standard.
Why don't you go ask an outreach worker in Nanaimo, do they make $100,000 a year? I don't think so. Not even with benefits. And I'm not saying that they don't deserve it either. I'm just saying that your $400,000 for 4 staff positions is outrageous. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, this is supposed to be for questions. Councilor Brennan.
What, questions of him, not questions, okay. I was back there on question period. Mr. O'Donnell, we've been sort of watching the homelessness camp that we have. And at the beginning, we were told that there was a council. I'm assuming that it would have been an elected council of the individual residents there. And that decision-making was placed in the hands of the council. And I assumed that that meant that there was confidence that that council was going to make good decisions and be looking out for the welfare and the interests of the residents at the camp. I think we've seen that that's fallen apart a little bit. People volunteering their time to create a government structure, and with that comes, I'm assuming, some enforcement. How else do you say to people, well, you know what, your behavior is such that we just can't let you stay here, you gotta go. So I'm not sure how that gets enforced. So in my view, maybe it's naive, but I'm kind of taking that experience and putting it on the drop-in center. and saying, well, if you've got a drop-in center, you need to be able to do better than have volunteers be entirely in charge of how things are going to run, what the expected behaviors are, what are the consequences of not behaving in those ways. For me, that means you need to have some staffing in place to help the residents manage their relationships with each other, manage their relationships with the staff, manage their relationships with the people who walk by on the street. To me, the other piece of that staffing in a drop-in center would be, like Councillor Hong said, nursing staff maybe, but it would also be people who are trained in assisting people with the obstacles that they have in qualifying for income assistance or EI or Canada Pension or whatever. Those people need to be paid well enough that they stay. They need to be paid well enough that, and I know this isn't a question necessarily until we get to the end, and then I'll say, isn't that so? And it will have been made a question. So I just want to be able to put this out there, that when you want to have something, we've seen the experience of using just straight volunteers, and sometimes that doesn't work out that well. This is a city-run initiative. We need to have ways of governing it and relationships. We want to be able to offer more than just a pool table. We want to be able to offer access to services that are going to, people may want to use, I'm not saying they have to, but may want to use to step themselves into a different situation where they're on income assistance, where they have an income, where they have access to health benefits, those kinds of things. So that's why I think this is a good idea. So here we go. Isn't that so?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Brennan. I guess my concern, I've discussed with the people today as well, our concern is the fact that this is, you're about to vote to get Mayor McKay to send a letter to Leonard Krogh asking for something that the province is just not going to do. And if a layman can figure that out, then I'm sure everyone here has at least thought about that. And, you know, I'm just going to say it, you know, with an election this year, I mean, we're concerned about people playing politics against other people to set up situations where other people look bad. And if y'all want to do that in a political campaign season, fine, fair enough, welcome to politics, but it's not really cool to do that on the backs of a bunch of homeless people, especially when we're in the middle of a homeless crisis. And I'm not pointing any fingers, nothing like that. I'm just saying this is how it's appearing to a lot of people, and perception is reality. I hear what you're saying, though.
No, you get to say, isn't that so?
Is that so?
Isn't that so?
Councillor.
Yes, I think there's an element of truth to what you're saying. Thank
you. Councillor Fuller.
Could you give me a list of those outreach workers that are willing to volunteer?
Not you.
The average salary of outreach workers is over $20 per hour. So if you know some outreach workers that are willing to commit to 35, 40 hours a week at $0 an hour, provided they're professionals, not just straight volunteers. We've seen how well that's worked at the ghetto you supported. So if you have the name of some qualified outreach workers who would be willing to offer up free time, I'm sure if we do get the funding, because you are right, we may not, but we may as well, because the province also recognizes a homeless crisis and they're contributing mass amounts of monies to it. In my opinion, not enough. It could be masses more. But I'm sure if this happens, having extra volunteers to supplement the paid workers might actually cut down on costs. So if you could send me a list of those volunteers, I'd appreciate it.
No, not a problem, Councillor Fuller, no, absolutely. I also know of a bunch of outreach workers who would probably love to work at the landing pad for $100,000 salary a year as well. So, I mean, we can exchange notes.
Thank you. Councillor Kipp.
Thank you. I guess the biggest thing for me is the homeless people blaming me for their problem as a city councillor. That really does bother me, because when the circus came to town, it wasn't my circus, but now they're my monkeys, right? And so I have to try and take care of them. And so the concept of a living room came out in 1995, 96. We first put one out there, and former social people worked on it, but it failed. It fell apart because people didn't want to go there. It wasn't, the whole concept of it is to make a comfortable place for people to go when they spend the whole night wandering around the community, scared at night. They can go to a place during the day and feel comfortable and get some support services. I too look at the wages and the benefits for this and think that's crazy, because we don't pay people that much money. We probably should. But for me, what is our options as a municipal government? What can we do? We get lobbied on all sides of this issue, to build homes, to not build homes, to push these people out, to not push them out, to give them water, to not give them water. It's a real tough position, and as a municipal council, all we can really do is lobby those responsible. That's the province. That's the representatives that have represented us for a few years. So that's, I think, the concept here is to help pay for some of this stuff. Right now, Tent City is costing money that does not and will not go to helping the homeless. It's costing money like crazy. And they've shown up. I mean, you must know, how many people are there? They're all Canadians? Yeah. They're all BC people? Maybe, yeah. They're all from Nanaimo? Maybe. But who's responsible to pay for that? My tax dollars to pay for that? I'm already sending tax dollars to the province and the feds. They're supposed to pay. And so we have to put pressure on them to pay up. And that's, I guess, the toughest thing. The toughest thing for me is to getting blamed that we're the problem for this homeless situation. When we tried for years, how many housing have we built, wet houses, in the last year? How many times we stood in front of people screaming at us that we're going to kill their children? We've heard tonight the fear. So how do we deal with that as a municipality? It's easier sometimes to throw up your hands and go, that's not my circus. But we're trying to help, and this is an idea to try and open it up. And I do believe the price has gone way beyond what it can actually value, what it will serve. So, and my question is, it's not, it's a statement. Thank you.
Absolutely. That's what I'm trying to say too. It's the cost that getting to that $650,000. It's all tax money too. I mean, as a taxer, I'm not a municipal taxpayer. I don't own property, but as a citizen, we all pay taxes. So whether it's provincial, federal, municipal, and I do understand the fact that municipal government, you're limited in what you can do. And quite frankly, with this city council over the last couple of years, you guys kind of get blamed for everything. But at the same time, I look at it as a community issue. To me personally, I know people who are homeless who have drug addictions. I know people who are homeless who just screw-ups and don't have their life in order yet. I also know homeless people who just can't pay their rent. They got rent evicted, and they're really good people. They have jobs, not just at Tent City, but all over the city. And I really believe that at a certain point, there's a human or moral obligation that rises above whose job is what, where, whatever. We just need to come together as a community, because realistically, the people in Ottawa don't really care about what happens in Vancouver Island, and quite frankly, the people in Victoria don't really care about what happens in Nanaimo. So we need to start looking at community solutions. And while I understand the landing pad, that sounds like a community solution to me, until we hear $650,000, $400,000 going to staffing.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to say before we let you go, Mr. O'Donnell, that we asked our staff to do something. They came back with a report. They gave us the numbers. They're asking us to now take it to the next step, to get into, to request participation by the provincial government, which we said from the onset that's what we were going to do. Here's the difference. It's a different price tag than what it was before, and they may totally reject us, as you'd suggest, but they might come up with something different, and we'll talk about it with the provincial government. So we're responding here to a report that was given to us by our staff after we asked them for it. So that's all we're dealing with here. Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks.
No further questions. So is someone prepared to move the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Hong, seconded by Councillor Brown. Are there any further discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Show Councillor Bestwick and Kip opposed. Motion carries. Next one is Cannabis Task Force. update, to be introduced by Councillor Kemp.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to read. Staff has put something together for me to read. I appreciate it very much. Council and the public is aware that the Ad hoc Cannabis Task Force was established in order to consider the impacts of the pending legalization of cannabis and to make recommendations to Council. As the chair of the task force, I'm pleased to announce that the task force has completed its mandate as per the approved terms of reference, and this evening Council has received the series of recommendations from the task force for consideration. The legalization of cannabis is a challenging topic for local governments and one that is guaranteed to evolve as federal and provincial governments continue to adjust into this brand new growing and thriving industry. The recommendations we're presenting to Council from the task force this evening are based on the known regulatory schemes that are established to date, both provincial and federal. And as these evolve, so will the local government's response. As such, you'll see that one of the recommendations is that the task force is to review the associated bylaws and amendments on a one-year anniversary of the implementation. I want to take a moment to thank the task force members for their time and thoughtful considerations of this very interesting topic. We had representatives from a number of city committees, from Sadie Baudouin-Loeb, representing Planning and Development Committee, Dennis McMahon, representing the Community Vitality Committee, Rob Whitten, representing the Public Safety Committee, Robert Laurie, representing the cannabis industry, Philip Lucas, representing the cannabis industry, Dr. Paul Hasselback from Island Health, and Corporal Man Nguyen from the RCMP. There's also individuals attended, and I think we had over 18 delegations and presentations received by the task force. And I'd just like to say that I think when we started off the backgrounder, we covered all federal and provincial regulations, zoning and business licensing, and looked at liquor and controlled substances. Another meeting, we reviewed all of the options for retail, for siting, for licensing, production, corporate production, and sort of residential production, both the smoking bylaws and, of course, the personal consumption. And then after that, staff reported on the stakeholder input and the recommendations came forward. Currently, Nanaimo has what I would consider a viable retail business. About 30 or more stores are in process. But what we had to figure out is where and when and who was involved in this for operations and production, and where and how the big retail productions would happen. And I guess this has a new connotation for Airbnb, because there's people are looking for local and small productions. And of course, we looked at the safety aspects for children and the criminal aspects involved in it. And I would like to say that we maybe missed having the school district involved, because they have sent forward a letter that we received today, and they're looking at having some distances. One of the things that I will say that came out of the committee was sometimes the distances seem very arbitrary, like we make up a distance. And what is the proven value of that distance, and how does it make, like if it's 300 meters from a school, does that stop the kids? Is that enough? I don't think so. So that's a kind of arbitrary things. But I'd like to pass it on to Mr. Lindsay right now at this point, and he can introduce more of the associated recommendations. But as a task force, we completed it April, May, and June. We did our job. We did it fast, and I appreciate the work that people did. And there were some very interesting debates at the table and very interesting delegations too. So thank you very much.
We do have a delegation. Are you going to get into the recommendations, Mr. Lindsay?
Your Worship, it's certainly up to Council, but I'm prepared to run through the recommendations. I can do that before or after your delegation, whatever you wish.
How about we hear the delegation?
Okay.
As normal practice. Delegation, Mr. Matthew O'Donnell.
He's going to go in distances.
Hi there, Matthew O'Donnell. I won't waste too much of your time. I feel like I've spoken enough today. I'm just here actually to speak in support of the majority of the recommendations, with the exception of one. I've been nipping at this council's heels for basically 3 years now to have some sort of regulations and regulate cannabis, mainly because I look at it as a billion-dollar industry that's existed in British Columbia for decades now, whether we want to admit it or not, and it's just about to be plugged into the legal economy. So why shouldn't we take advantage of it as a municipality and as a city? I mean, it's here anyway, and why not? So that's the reason why I've always been basically yapping about cannabis. My only gripe, I guess, with the current regulations is the 300 meters between the actual retail shops themselves. I feel like it's over-regulation. I know that the argument in the staff report is that, we have to factor in density and, blah, 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 blah. But the fact of the matter is, Nanaimo is in a unique position from the rest of the country where the rest of the country can talk about hypotheticals and what would happen if a bunch of dispensaries moved into one area or whatever. Here in Nanaimo, we've had close to 30 operating for about 3 years now. The sky hasn't fallen. Everything's fine. As a matter of fact, I can think of one former problematic bar in downtown Nanaimo which turned into a complete dispensary, canceled their liquor license, and all of the complaints across the street at the Pacifica high-rise condo has completely disappeared. You can go ask the bylaw department yourself. There hasn't been a complaint in years. Because the fact of the matter is stoners like to go to bed early and they don't like noise, et cetera, et cetera. So the point being here is that the 300 meters between retail shops, it does nothing to mitigate the risk of children. It won't increase it, it won't decrease it. Fact of the matter is, unfortunately, I smoke cigarettes and I also use cannabis. I can go to any corner store, gas station, grocery store, drugstore, wherever, and I can buy a pack of smokes. I think cigarettes are a little bit more dangerous than cannabis. Just overall, I believe 300 meters between the shops, it's just over-regulation. Not only that, provincial law is going to state, as you're all aware of, that if someone wants a retail cannabis license, number one, they have to go through a public forum, meaning they have to, just like if you're going to open up a liquor store. And number two, this council has to approve it, every single one. The province is not going to approve any license unless it has support from the municipal government. With that said, public hearing, and you guys have the final say. Why eliminate the possibility of allowing businesses to thrive by automatically putting in that 300 meters between shops rule? Because all you're doing is just over-regulating for the sake of regulation. There's no benefit there. So I respectfully ask that you consider dropping the 300 meters between the dispensaries. If the school board's suggesting doing 300 meters from a daycare in a park or a school to a dispensary, I mean, fair enough. I also personally don't really believe that it's not going to increase or decrease the risk to the community, but if you have to do it, you have to do it. I understand it. But I mean, if you're going to put 300 meters between shops, it's going to result also in job loss right off the bat. Sure, some of these dispensaries are probably not going to get licensed. Some are going to close down. There's going to be job loss already and anyway. So as a local government, what you could do is do what you can to mitigate the loss of jobs, just because you don't really have to, put in this regulation. And another point too is just the fact of commercial vacancies. I don't really see a lineup of here in the South Nanaimo, a lineup of new businesses that are just eager to fill all those vacant commercial spots that those dispensaries are going to result in having here in a couple of months. So once again, let's encourage small business growth, even if it is a taboo subject like cannabis. And just give them a fighting chance. Anyway, thank you.
Councillor Armstrong.
Oh, no, actually, mine's for staff after.
Okay. Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you. Mr. O'Donnell, you mentioned 30 dispensaries operating in Nanaimo, some within 300 meters of each other. And are they all operating legally?
Actually, they're all currently operating illegally if we're going by the word of the law.
Right. And do they have business licenses?
No, they don't, but that's not to say they haven't tried for the last 3 years.
But they don't have business licenses?
The city won't accept their money, that's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you.
Councillor Armstrong.
No, I'm waiting for staff after. I'll wait till he does his report and then I'll ask my question.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sorry.
Diane, pardon me, Councillor Brown, same with you? Okay. Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Worship. I just have a few slides to walk through the recommendations. Before we start, I'm not going to go into a lot of the regulatory context here, but in general, I think everybody knows we're moving quickly towards the legalization of cannabis in the country. We're now scheduled for October for cannabis to become legal. The way the system is being set up right now in real general terms is that the federal government is going to license and approve production. They've put in rules in place about production. They've put in rules in place about personal cultivation. They've largely left decisions around distribution to each province. So each province has done it a little bit different. Here in BC, they're following a model which I would describe most similar are almost identical to how we deal with liquor distribution, and that it'll be done through the province, through the Liquor Distribution Board. In terms of the retail model in the province, is what we're being told is that there'll be a combination of both public and private stores, again, exactly like we see on the liquor store front. So the task force looked at a number of topics, as Councillor Kipp recommended, but certainly main part of the discussion was around how do we address this issue of retail stores in the community. The province has really left it to each local government to determine how they want to proceed. And when we talked to the task force, there's really three main options. And we said we can identify cannabis retail as an as-of-right use in our zoning bylaw, which means it would be a use permitted in multiple zones. We looked at the second option of creating site-specific zoning. So you create a specific use for cannabis retail and you require rezoning for each of those. Or the third option is not to allow any retail at all within the community. And the task force is recommended that second option. So the first three recommendations before you this evening are really around that recommendation. And it's that we make sure it's clear in our zoning bylaw that cannabis retail stores are separate and different than our general retail designation. And that we require site-specific rezonings for each and every cannabis retail store. So again, exactly like liquor stores, the applications will be made to the province's referrals will come to Nanaimo, and if council approves with this approach, those applicants would need to submit rezoning applications to ultimately be vetted by council and approved by council. To assist with the rezoning, there is a recommendation to proceed with criteria, which will assist in those review of those files. Now, it's important to note that these are guidelines. They're not adopted by bylaw, so anything we talk about in terms of a setback or a distance separation is just that, a guideline that we would evaluate applications against and bring them forward to council. So like with any other guideline, council has the ability to consider them as part of an application, but they do not become black and white laws, so to speak. So the guidelines that were included, and I'll go into a little bit more detail, include a separation between cannabis stores of 300 meters. The draft guidelines we put in front of the committee also had a recommendation of 150-meter separation from retail stores, from schools and daycares, which is again similar to your rezoning criteria you have for liquor stores. So we're, because the province is dealing with it generally the same as liquor stores, the approach from staff was to maintain that philosophy and treat them similar to liquor stores. You'll note in here part of the recommendation by the task force was that we reach out specifically to the school board and receive their input on the separations from schools. The school board, and I think it's attached to your agenda this evening, is a correspondence you received from the school board, and they're actually recommending it not proceed with the 150, which is in the current draft, but that we look at increasing that to 300 meters from schools and daycares. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in the upcoming slide. The final recommendation around retail stores is that we not look at creating a specific business license fee for retail stores right now. Liquor stores in the community apply under our general business license fees, which are $165. We do have varying fees in our business license bylaw for nightclubs and cabarets and lounges, which are higher. So there's been a long-standing understanding that we're going to review those as part of a liquor control strategy. So the recommendation of the task force was not to introduce new rates now, but it be reviewed as part of a review of those liquor license fees in the future. So just talking a little bit about the guidelines. I know this is impossible to read on the screen, but the polygons you see here are setbacks of 150 meters around existing schools and existing licensed daycares in the community. The colored areas, the brown and the yellow and red, those are the areas in town where we generally see commercial uses. So we're just giving a sense at this time when we put this together to the committee of what are the impacts of 150-meter setbacks on our existing commercial areas. The next slide is we took the recommendation from the school board and increased those buffers to 300 meters. So the entire city, obviously on the left, on the right is a little close-up of downtown, just to give you some context. So the green is setbacks around school board property, and the purple is setbacks around licensed daycare. So again, these are recommendations, and you've got your first round of input from the school board. I think as we go through this process and the public hearing, you'll continue to get input on what the appropriate setbacks are. We're not here this evening to get final determination from council. I think that'll come as we bring forward the bylaws, but I wanted to give you a sense of what those policy recommendations would look like. The setback between stores is interesting, and this is where we differ a little bit between what the province has done with liquor stores and their approach to cannabis retail. Under the province's own rules for separations around liquor store, they have a 1 kilometer separation. So that's the policy which has governed the most recent round of liquor stores that have been added to the community. So most of those stores exist within 1 kilometer or a minimum of 1 kilometer from each other. The province was very clear when they brought forward cannabis retail that they were not going to implement the 1 kilometer setback at a provincial level, and instead they were going to leave it to local governments to decide what the appropriate separation between stores were. So I include this graphic, and we did this for the committee, just to give you a sense when you look at something like the downtown, what a 1 kilometer buffer would do in terms of separation versus a 300 meter buffer, which is ultimately what the committee was recommending. And again, in the guidelines, I think it's important to point out, it talks about a recommendation of 300 meters, but it does say there's areas in town where you have higher density, like your downtown, where you may want to look at a reduced setback below what the 300 meters is. Again, it'll be reviewed on a site-by-site recommendation. The next series of recommendations deal with the processing. So of course, under our existing bylaw right now, we have medical marijuana growing in production. This is quickly going to become an antiquated term. We'll no longer need medical, but it'll simply be growing in production. So we're recommending that be replaced with cannabis production and processing, and then these will be federally licensed facilities. Right now, medical marijuana growing and production is a site-specific use in the I-4 zone. Given the changes that are being done at a federal level, the task force is recommending that council consider outing that as an outright use in the I-4 zone. So generally, if you think of the area at Duke Point. Recommendation number 6. So the federal government, in addition to allowing the larger scale cannabis production and processing, they're also prepared to license what they're calling micro or craft processors. And I'll talk about a little bit more on that on the next slide, but they're generally these small scale processors. So the recommendations from the task force is that we look at allowing small scale production within our I-1 and I-2 zones, subject to an odor abatement strategy, which is very similar to how we deal with other similar uses. Recommendation number 7 was that we not look at adding cannabis production within our agricultural zone at this time, or our AR1, AR2. The city has limited amounts of agricultural land, and the vast majority of those are within close proximity to residential, or they're on lands which are designated for other uses. So the recommendation was to not include them on agricultural zone properties now. I would note that the ALR is still struggling with this issue of how will they address them on ALR lands, but the city has a very small amount of ALR lands within our boundaries. I include this graphic because it's possibly the most Canadian thing I've ever seen, but the federal government, when they came out with this discussion about what micro cannabis is, they said it's 200 square meters or half of a neutral zone of an NHL hockey rink, and they actually included this in their literature at the federal level. So I thought I had to find a way to include that in a presentation. But 200 square meters is that micro processing that the federal government will license, and again it's that recommendation to include that in our light industrial zones. The next series of recommendations around public consumption, and the recommendation number 9 is that we update our smoking bylaw to clarify that it includes cannabis. So there's a draft smoking bylaw that's attached to the report this evening, but we will be bringing that forward if council proceeds with these recommendations and for consideration of bylaw adoption. Recommendations number 10 and 11. Last slide, sorry. 10, 11. So 10, the task force had a recommendation that this package of recommendations be sent to the school board for the review and input. Since that time, I've sat down with school board, reviewed the report with them, and the letter that you have before you this evening is actually their response. So it includes two things: a recommendation to increase the setback to 300 meters from schools and daycares, but also that the school board be included on referrals with individual applications so that they can provide input as those applications are vetted by council. And then, as Councillor Kipp mentioned, recommendation number 11 was that council direct staff to complete a review upon the anniversary of these bylaws, as we would do with almost any time we bring forward comprehensive new regulations. We'd recommend, obviously, that those be evaluated and reviewed, in this case, 1 year following adoption. And, Your Worship, that's a summary of the recommendations.
Thank you. Is someone prepared to move the recommendations?
Well, I'll move them for the moment, too.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Kipp, seconded by Councillor Brennan. Councillor Hong.
Thank you. Through you to staff, with regards to renaming it cannabis production and processing, what about all this stuff that we hear about, like extracting oils and cooking and you know, as that comes, where does that fit in? Is that going to fit somewhere?
Yeah, and in your worship, I think this is what Councillor Kipp was referring to when he's saying that the rules are going to evolve. So right now, the federal government's been very clear that this is about dried cannabis and seeds. So the retail store will be dried cannabis and seeds, but this door has certainly been left open for oils and edibles in the future. So I think those issues around other forms are going to change. Issues around public or consumption lounges, for example, those things are going to evolve and change. But these recommendations are a response solely to what we know as the regulatory landscape as it's proposed to exist come October, but you're right, it's absolutely going to evolve.
So then a follow-up, if I may. If somebody decides to come and say, well, I want to have an extraction facility to extract oils from cannabis, would that be a one-off for us to come before council to put them in a zoning then, I guess?
Your Worship, I think the way it's drafted right now, it just says cannabis production and processing, so I don't think you would need any further amendment. As long as you had federal approval to do that, you could do that under our zone, the draft zoning that's being recommended by the task force.
Which is only I-4?
For the large-scale facilities, that's correct, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
First of all, I want to thank Councillor Kipp for all the work that he did. Mr. Whitten gave us an update and said they were really excellent sessions and really well done. So thank you very much for all the work that you guys did. I struggle too with the 300 meters. I don't see why we even need a distance. You talk to kids and whatever, and they say actually the closer to the school, the harder it is to get because there's more eyes looking at them. So, so I just find it, it's interesting when we spoke, or I attended at the LGLA sessions with the lawyers who recommended not having distances because it can change so much that 1 minute Woodland School would be an example. Now we build it, then they decide to reopen the school. What do you do with the built, or the people that are already there? Because if you allow the school to reopen, you're breaking your own zoning, so they're one-offs, whatever. But that's an issue. And then my other question is, and I don't know if it would go here, but what about those, is there any place where you have to declare that you've been growing plants for future? Because mold will be an issue no matter what, whether you're growing 10 or you're growing 40 plants, you could have mold and water damage, and there should be something, I believe, in our bylaws, or whether it has to be into the real estate to, disclose that marijuana has been grown. Thank you.
Your Worship, thank you. And that question actually ties into something in which I was going to note, which is apparently I missed a slide here with recommendation number 8, which is in your report, which deals with this issue of personal cultivation. We've had a history of having problems with homes that are used for large scale production, and mold is just one of the problems that we end up with. At this point, it looks like under the licensing, people can obtain licensings to grow for their own under the existing federal program. Looks like that will continue for some period of time. In addition to that, which brings those challenges around, homes and mold and et cetera. In addition to that, the federal changes around cannabis legalization are very clear that they include provisions for individuals to grow for own personal cultivation, and the limit is 4 plants per what they call dwelling house, so 4 plants per dwelling house, and that's around
So regardless of how many adults you have in the house, you can have 4 plants inside or outside the house. And then they left it to the province to further regulate that, and the province is saying, yes, you can have 4 plants outside the house, but they can't be visible from any public area. So like a public street, for example, you wouldn't be able to see someone's plants growing. So the committee looked at the federal regulations, the provincial regulations, and decided based on where they're going not to add any further local government or municipal regulations around that 4 plant personal cultivation.
Thank you. Councillor Brennan.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I want to thank Councillor Kipp as well. I'm going to go back to the council of 2011, that was elected in 2011. I can remember Councillor Kipp telling us then that we were going to have to start looking at this whole issue of cannabis and zoning, and where it could be sold, and among lots of other things, and he felt that we should get started on that. And so I want to thank him for that, because it was a long time coming, but here we are with this report today. It's a good report. I want to thank Mr. Lindsay and the staff and that whole committee. I have a couple of questions. First of all, I'm not sure. Agricultural rural residential zone, is that different than the agricultural land reserve?
Yes, Your Worship. The city has a, if you think of agricultural zones, much of the area around Lindley Valley, for example, or north of Lindley would be agricultural. Much of the area in Jinglepot would be agricultural. Some of the lands in the Jinglepot on the far reaches of the community would be in the ALR, but the vast majority would not be. So
these ones we control, then,
that
the
is correct.
agricultural rural residential.
That is correct,
Okay,
yes.
thank you. The other thing that I thought was interesting is what Councillor Armstrong said about the local government academies suggesting that we not have zones, I guess, or circles or areas where you couldn't be. I have no opinion on that whatsoever, really, except that if we do maintain them, I think we need to address how you measure them, because it's certainly come up when we've had liquor stores wanting to open up, and we've been of the opinion that it doesn't fit with, it isn't outside the circle, and they're saying, well, it depends on how you measure it, and so we need to be precise about those things. And the thing about the numbers of, or, you know, the how far apart each individual store can be, I think that that's been problematic in cities where they have gone ahead and issued or embarked upon issuing licenses, and then ran into the trouble about who gets first pick, right? Does a difference of one day applying on Thursday and someone else coming in applying on Friday, and because they got here Thursday, they get the prize? Other cities have found that to be a problem, simply because they have been allowed to be there, not licensed, but none of them have been licensed. So how do you choose one over the other in terms of how close they are to one another? And I asked a councillor in Victoria if she had any regrets about the work that they did and the rules that they put in place, and she said that really was the only one, and in her view at this time you just have to let the market decide, and otherwise it just becomes really wide open, I would say, to some sort of quid pro quo, or, you know, some tampering with the rules or whatever. And you want to be as clean as possible, and you don't want to be open to that, or even open to the charges of that. So those are the only comments I have. except to say, I don't think that we give permission for schools to open or close, do we? So, you know, we wouldn't have to worry about giving Woodlands the okay to open and, yeah, but they don't have to ask if they can open, they decide to open. Anyway, that's just,
Thank you. Councillor Fuller.
Curious if you would happen to know how many of the 30 dispensaries in Nanaimo, closet pot shops in Nanaimo, are within that 300-meter distance of each other. I know of 3 up on Nickel Street, but I'm not sure about any of the others being within that distance. I'm curious if you know.
Your Worship, through Councillor Phil, I don't know exact numbers, but there are areas of concentration. I agree with you. Nickel Street would be one. We tried to build some flexibility in the guidelines for that very thing, that there may be some areas of town where you want to consider something less than 300 square meters, but I'm sorry, I don't know.
Well, I'm actually quite fine with the 300 meters. I don't think it's going to limit small business. Done some math, and I think even with the 300 meters, it would allow for roughly 10,144 dispensaries if they all chose to get business licenses at one time. So we could be inundated. We could become the pot dispensary capital of Canada if we so chose to work this into our tourism. I'm glad that we're looking at the smoking bylaw and regulating. That's a definite one. I know right now, I smoked for 42 years, and I quit smoking cigarettes the day I died, so that's been 3.5 years now. And I don't even like the smell of cigarettes anymore. I can't believe how bad they actually smell. And when I'm walking down the street, I can smell pot. And some types of pot smell a heck of a lot worse than others. So I don't really want to be breathing that in, whether it'll have any effect on my lungs that the smoking hasn't already or not. So I really appreciate what Councillor Kipp, the rest of the task force have done, and I look forward to voting on these recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Kipp.
Thank you. I just chaired the committee. That's it. Through the chair, I don't own the committee. We're using the word term cannabis because marijuana has a bad connotation, so we decided to change that. Vaporizing would be in the smoking bylaws too. I don't know if that's clear to people. The distance, I believe, is arbitrary. I attended FCM, and it was the same issues across the country that people are dealing with. And it is really a cowboy show out there, and it is it's going to be an interesting paradigm over time. But I appreciate the work that staff did. Mr. Lindsay and his staff did a great job, pulled it together quickly, and the people that participated. So I just want to mention those couple of things, that it is, the smoking bylaw is an important one for her to look at too.
Thank you. Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you. Thanks to Jim and his committee. Quickly, the BC government's website has the regulations for those people that are out there thinking that they can run down to City Hall and make application for a retail dispensing license. All applications will go through the province, and then they'll be sent back to us at the city, as long as they check all the boxes off, to be able to be sent back to us for consideration by the municipality. So step one is to go to the province. Step one is not to come to the city. And so all the rules and regs are on the BC government's website right now. And October 17th, I think, is the day that it all kicks into gear. So if there's any other clarifications there, Mr. Lindsay, then perhaps you could let us know.
Councillor Hong.
Thank you. On the same lines of what Councillor Bestwick was saying and what Councillor Brennan was saying, how do we know? So is it first come, first served? Because we don't know when the province is going to process, or they're going to send us a lump at a time, or they're going to send us one at a time. And then we're sending it to School District 68, all applications to be vetted. So it seems like it's a little bit complicated, or how is this gonna roll out so the people that want to apply, what Councilor Vestwick says, went to the province, and the province kind of gives us a different order of when they come back, and they said, well, we got 20 downtown, so that's it, we're done for downtown and no more. But then the 23rd ones comes in and they're all for downtown, so how are we gonna deal with that when it comes up? Is there gonna be a process?
Yeah, I think those are good questions, and I think a little bit is going to depend on how we finally see the province roll this out. The guidelines suggest that what we'll want from the province is sort of a preliminary letter of approval. So it's the province and their licensing branch that will ultimately determine who's fit. The word they use, the term they use is fit and proper. Who's fit and proper to hold a license to sell this heavily regulated form of cannabis. So our intent is that they would do that fit and proper, give us a letter of approval in principle, and then council would vet those applications. With the 1 kilometer setback for liquor stores, it kind of became somewhat, they regulated the number you would get in a store because of their imposed setback. You're right, without that setback in place, I'm not exactly sure how they'll vet that, but I think we're going to have to take a somewhat a wait and see approach in terms of applications. But Councillor Bestwick's absolutely correct. The initial application ultimately will be to the province. I don't even know that they're ready to open up and receive applications yet. They weren't the last time I looked at their website. These recommendations, if they're passed tonight, are going to come forward for bylaw amendments, so we still need to go through that process, finalize the bylaw adoptions, have council finalize the guidelines, and then before we're in place to start taking applications. So we're some time off before we get to that point.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Kipp again.
I just wanted to say the liquor store spacing, to me, when it first came out, was almost an anti-competition issue, because they owned the liquor stores until that came out. And then they didn't want competition close to their own vehicle of sales, so I believe they put a fairly large distance in. The incidental thing to that is I can walk about every 200 or 300 yards in Nanaimo up the main highway and get a drink of beer or a glass of wine at every restaurant, every licensed place, every facility. So relating to a 1 kilometer for liquor stores is kind of, it's a bit of a misnomer for the relational value of how much alcohol is available, how many cigarettes are available, and those type of things. So again, I just wanted to make sure that, I thought it was an anti-competition law stopping the private people coming into the liquor business, and that's changed dynamically. And then it changed also that they can move their liquor establishment around, and it wasn't allowed. You had to be with your beer parlor or whatever before, and now you can move it around. So those rules are there, but they vary quite often. Thank you.
Thank you. See no further speakers. There's 11 different motions here. Take them together. They've been moved and seconded. Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Now, we were supposed to take a recess at 9 o'clock. What's council's pleasure? To keep on moving or to take a recess?
Keep going? Keep going. Keep going.
Okay, we'll keep going. So the next item is under bylaws with no accompanying report. Park dedication bylaw number 2018 at 7259. And then it's a motion that council reconsider. Who's moving this motion, please?
I will be. I was not available at the time the motion was. This is my first opportunity to address it at a council meeting, and I appreciate that council reviewed the.
Thank you. So it's been moved by Councillor Kipp. Is there a seconder?
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Fuller. Thank you. Councillor Thorpe. On the reading of the adoption.
Thank you, Chair. Is now the time to read the bylaw, or do we vote first whether or not to reconsider?
Pardon me. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
And now I will move that Park Dedication Bylaw 2018 number 7259 to dedicate land for park purpose be adopted.
Second the motion.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Any speakers? And before we vote on adoption, I'm not going to debate it. I just want to make a declaration that with 250 acres available, still find it hard to believe we couldn't find 10 to 15% of that to use for affordable housing. so I'll be voting against it. Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Show Mayor McKay opposed. Motion carries. Next one, zoning amendment bylaw 4500.117.
Thank you, Chair. I'll move that zoning amendment bylaw 4500.117 RA 378 to rezone a portion of 2560 Bowen Road to allow a site-specific use permitting auto sales, service, and rental in the community corridor zone, COR3, be adopted.
Thank you. Is there a seconder?
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Armstrong. Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Next one.
I will move that zoning amendment bylaw 2018 number 4500.121 to rezone 2202 Meredith Road from single-dwelling residential R1 to townhouse residential R6 with site-specific provisions to increase the maximum permitted building height to 9.2 meters and increase the maximum allowable floor area ratio to 0.7 be adopted.
Thank you very much. Seconder? Seconded by Councillor Hong, and I won't make the mistake. Again, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. There's a bylaw status sheet, which is page 1516 of the addendum. It's for information only. There's no correspondence, no notice of motions. And last but not least, question period. Thank you. There's only one listed, and that is Bruni. Do you wish to ask a question?
Question period.
Come on down.
Stewart Avenue. Mayor and honorable councilors. The Director of Community Development is asking that you close the deal for a piece of property that's owned by the city on Nanaimo River Road. I'd like to ask why you're considering selling this piece of property in a time when there's very little property around that could be used for community value. Also, the price on this piece of land is $16,500. Excuse me, somebody is really getting a good deal here somewhere down the road. So I'd like to know why you're considering selling this property at this time. Because being owned by the city of Nanaimo means that it is actually being owned by the people of Nanaimo.
Thank you. In actual fact, it's not a piece of property that we would normally consider to be a property. It's actually a very narrow sliver of a right-of-way for a sewer pipe.
It's being used for sewer?
Correct. It's no longer in service.
So the people that are buying it are putting in a sewer there? Is it?
No, it's a piece of property that we have as the city as a right-of-way on their property that we're going to be selling to them.
Okay, because
we're not using it anymore.
Okay, maybe you could just have clarified that a little bit further, because, you know, when land is being sold by the city, I sort of, worry about it.
You bet.
Can I ask one more question then? One more
Wow.
question? Okay. There's a lot of
Setting
development.
precedent, Bruni.
There's a lot of development happening in the city, and I'd like to know if you ever check the trees that are on those properties, because the trees are being cut down like crazy. And there's lots of cities in the world now that are not cutting trees down anymore. And pretty soon it's not going to be green, and I'd like you to just really think of that. I mean, every time a development comes along, bang, first thing that happens is the trees come down. Really.
Thank you.
Could Dale explain some of the things that we look at?
Mr. Lindsay?
Your worship, certainly with all development applications, they are vetted under our tree management plan and the tree bylaw. So if trees have to be removed, and on many sites they do have to be removed to accommodate development, their replacement is our first priority. But generally we look at both conservation wherever possible, but replacement where removal is required.
Thank you. The recording secretary, Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Your Worship. There's a gentleman that just came down that is wondering if it's Councillor's pleasure if he could ask a couple of questions. Mr. Anderson?
There are actually more points of information on things that came up tonight. My name is Jess Anderson. I live up on Selby Street. I'm more than slightly familiar with the homeless situation. Last 8 years I've lived on Selby Street. I've watched 49 evictions. I've reported over 35 break-ins at my place. I've seen the drug deals, the prostitution, the fights, and everything else that goes with the street scene. What I have noticed over the years is that one of the biggest things about the homeless problem is their visibility. And you're talking about a drop-in center during the day, but it's their behaviors and their homeless situation at night that has to be dealt with. And a daily drop-in when they can already go to the library and so on and so forth isn't really effective.
Do you have a question for Council, Mr. Anderson?
Okay. My question is, would the council consider taking some of that money and putting it into something effective? What I mean by effective is, it's their visibility that bothers everybody most. And one of the biggest parts of the visibility is they have to carry their household with them in a cart or a shopping cart or whatever. They're visible, they're dragging it around, they're sitting in everybody's doorway, they're getting chased hither and yon. You got 14 or 15 security guards chasing away from different buildings downtown. If council would consider renting a storage space for them to throw their stuff during the day, those that wanted to work would be able to not have to worry about their property. They'd be less visible, they'd be a little less unhappy, and by law enforcement wouldn't be running and grabbing their stuff all the time. And it's pretty cheap to rent a bunch of 2-foot lockers and place them in a public parking lot and say, lock your stuff up for the day, especially for the ones that want to go to work and currently can't because they got to carry too much stuff around.
So to answer your question, sir,
my question
yes.
is, would you consider doing something like that, which is cheap and simple and easy and far more cost-effective than a place
Great,
to
thank
sit
you, sir,
during the
thank
day?
you. To answer your question,
Okay.
yes, I do believe that that was part of the drop-in center's mandate, including a number of other things, showers, those sorts of things. But storage facilities were part of that.
Okay. Second part I was going to ask on, the question was raised by one of your councillors about cannabis processing for oils and foods and so on and so forth. And nobody seemed really sure on how that would be done. It would probably, my understanding from talking to people with Health Canada, would be dealing with that, same as they do with all the naturopathic medicines and so forth. That's just a point of information I wanted to bring forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Motion to adjourn, seconder by Councillor Thorpe. Thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.